My father sold me for £50 on a Tuesday morning, as casually as one might sell a horse that had outlived its usefulness. I did not cry when the coins exchanged hands, for I had learned long ago that tears were a currency my father did not value. I remember the way the autumn light fell through the cracked window of our cottage, illuminating the dust that danced in the air like tiny spirits bearing witness to my fate. My father stood with his back to me, counting the money twice, then 3 times, as if he feared the stranger might have cheated him. The stranger himself was a thick-necked man named Mr. Horace Grimsby, a merchant of moderate means and immoderate cruelty, whose eyes had assessed me the way one might assess livestock at a country fair. My name is Eleanor Ashford, and I was 22 years old when I became property. I should tell you how I arrived at such a moment, for no woman falls into servitude without a path of stones laid before her, each one placed by hands she once trusted. My mother had died when I was 17, taken by a fever that swept through our village like a vengeful ghost. She had been the only softness in our home, the only voice that spoke my name with tenderness. When she departed this world, she took with her whatever remained of my father's humanity. He had always been a man of appetites, my father. Appetites for drink, for cards, for the false promise of easy fortune. But my mother had been his anchor, the gentle weight that kept him tethered to responsibility. Without her, he drifted into darker waters. The small farm that had sustained our family for generations began to wither under his neglect. First, we sold the livestock, then the furniture, then the land itself, piece by piece, until all that remained was the cottage and the daughter he had never wanted. I had tried to save us. I took in mending from the village women, washed linens for the local inn, sold herbs and remedies I had learned to make from my mother's recipes. But my earnings were never enough to fill the hole my father's gambling carved into our lives. He would take what I earned and disappear for days, returning with empty pockets and a temper sharpened by failure. I should have left. I know that now. But where does a woman alone go in a world that offers her no place? I had no family to receive me, no skills that would grant me respectable employment, no dowry that might attract a husband willing to rescue me from my circumstances. So I stayed, and I endured, and I told myself that surely things could not get worse. I was wrong. Mr. Grimsby had come to our village seeking workers for his household in the city. He was not particular about their origins, only their obedience. When my father heard of this, he saw not an opportunity for honest employment, but a chance to settle his debts and rid himself of the burden I had become. The transaction was simple and devastating, £50 for 5 years of my labor. I would work in Mr. Grimsby's household as a servant, bound by contract, unable to leave until my term was complete. My father signed the papers with a hand that did not tremble, and Mr. Grimsby smiled with teeth that reminded me of a wolf's. I will not burden you with every detail of the years that followed. Some memories are better left in darkness, where they cannot wound fresh. Suffice it to say that Mr. Grimsby's household was not a home, but a prison dressed in respectable curtains. I scrubbed floors until my knees bled. I polished silver until my fingers cracked. I endured the casual cruelties of a man who believed that those beneath him existed only to serve his comfort and absorb his frustrations. There were other servants, of course, a cook named Mrs. Brennan, who showed me small kindnesses when she could. A footman named Thomas, who never met my eyes, but always left an extra portion of bread where I might find it. We were all prisoners in our own way, bound by contracts or circumstances that offered no escape. We learned to move through the house like ghosts, seen but never acknowledged, present but never real. 3 years passed in this manner. 3 years of silence and service, of swallowed pride and quiet survival. I learned to make myself small, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to disappear into the walls when Mr. Grimsby's temper flared. I learned that dignity is not something that can be taken from you, only something you can choose to surrender. And I chose every day to hold on to mine, even when it cost me. It was in my 3rd year of service that everything changed. Mr. Grimsby had business dealings with many men of varying stations, but none so elevated as the Duke of Wentworth. I had heard the name spoken in whispers among the other servants, always with a mixture of awe and fear. The Duke was said to be one of the wealthiest men in England, owner of vast estates and holder of ancient titles. He was also said to be cold, distant, and utterly uninterested in the society that so desperately sought his favor. When word came that the Duke would be visiting Mr. Grimsby's home to discuss a matter of trade, the household erupted into frantic preparation. Every surface was to be polished to mirror brightness. Every meal was to be prepared to perfection. Every servant was to be invisible, efficient, and above all, silent. I was assigned to prepare the drawing room where the meeting would take place. It was early morning when I began my work, the pale light of dawn just beginning to filter through the heavy curtains. I moved through my tasks with the mechanical precision that 3 years had taught me, my mind wandering to places far from that cold room. I did not hear him enter. It was the quality of the silence that alerted me first, a different kind of stillness, as if the very air had drawn a breath and held it. I looked up from where I knelt on the floor, cloth in hand, and found myself staring at a pair of boots so finely made that they seemed almost otherworldly in that dim light. My gaze traveled upward, past legs clad in perfectly tailored trousers, past a waistcoat of deep burgundy silk, past a cravat tied with mathematical precision, until it reached a face that seemed carved from the same cold marble as the statues in the garden. He was tall, this stranger, with dark hair swept back from a forehead that spoke of aristocratic breeding. His eyes were the color of a winter storm, gray and deep and utterly unreadable. His jaw was strong, his cheekbones sharp, his lips pressed into a line that suggested he had forgotten how to smile, if indeed he had ever known. This, I understood without being told, was the Duke of Wentworth. I scrambled to my feet, nearly upsetting my bucket of water in my haste. My cheeks burned with the humiliation of being discovered in such a position, on my knees like a supplicant before a God who had not asked for worship. "Forgive me, Your Grace," I managed to stammer, my eyes fixed on the floor as propriety demanded. "I was told the meeting would not begin until 10. I will leave at once." I gathered my things with trembling hands, expecting at any moment to hear the sharp reprimand that men of his station so often delivered to servants who had the audacity to exist in their presence. But no reprimand came. There was only silence, and the weight of his gaze upon me like a physical thing. I was almost to the door when his voice stopped me. Wait. It was not a request. It was a command, spoken with the quiet authority of a man who had never been refused. I froze, my hand on the door handle, my heart pounding against my ribs like a bird desperate to escape its cage. "Turn around." I obeyed, because what else could I do? I turned, and I lifted my eyes, and I met his gaze for the first time. What I saw there confused me. It was not the cold dismissal I had expected, nor the predatory interest I had learned to fear in men who held power over me. It was something else entirely, something I could not name. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unchanging. Then he spoke again, his voice low and measured. "What is your name?" "Eleanor, Your Grace." "Eleanor Ashford." He repeated my name as if tasting it, testing its weight on his tongue. Then he nodded once, a gesture so small it might have been imagined, and turned away to examine the books on Mr. Grimsby's shelf. "You may go, Eleanor Ashford." I fled. There is no other word for it. I fled that room as if the devil himself pursued me, my pulse racing and my thoughts in chaos. I told myself it meant nothing, that encounter. A duke had spoken to a servant. It happened every day in houses across England. It was not remarkable. It was not significant. And yet I could not forget the way he had looked at me. Not through me, as so many others did, but at me, as if I were a person worthy of being seen. The meeting between the Duke and Mr. Grimsby took place as scheduled. I was not present, of course. I was assigned to the kitchens that day, far from the drawing room where men of consequence discussed matters of trade and finance. But I found my thoughts returning again and again to that gray-eyed stranger, to the way my name had sounded in his voice, to the inexplicable feeling that something had shifted in the universe, though I could not say what. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined the entire encounter. The Duke of Wentworth had no reason to remember a servant girl he had stumbled upon while she scrubbed floors. He moved in a world of ballrooms and estates, of political intrigue and aristocratic marriages. I was nothing to him. Less than nothing. But then the letters began to arrive. They came addressed to Mr. Grimsby, bearing the Wentworth seal in deep blue wax. At first I thought nothing of them. Men of business corresponded frequently. But then I noticed how Mr. Grimsby's demeanor changed after reading them, how his eyes would narrow with calculation, how his lips would curve into a smile that made my skin crawl. It was Mrs. Brennan who told me what the letters contained. She found me in the kitchen one evening, peeling potatoes for the next day's dinner. Her face was pale, her hands wringing her apron with an anxiety I had never seen in her before. "Eleanor," she whispered, glancing around to ensure we were alone. "I must tell you something. Something I overheard." I set down my knife, my attention captured by the fear in her voice. "What is it, Mrs. Brennan?" She leaned closer, her words barely audible above the crackling of the fire. "The Duke of Wentworth. He has been writing to Mr. Grimsby. About you." My heart seemed to stop in my chest. "About me? That is impossible. He does not even know who I am. He knows your name," she said. "He knows your situation, the letters." "Eleanor, he has been asking about your contract, about the terms of your service, about how much it would cost to release you from your obligations." I stared at her, uncomprehending. Why would a duke concern himself with the contract of a servant girl? Mrs. Brennan shook her head, her expression troubled. "I do not know, but Mr. Grimsby is pleased. He has been boasting to the footman about how he has caught the interest of a man who could buy this entire house 100 times over. He speaks of negotiations, of prices." My blood ran cold. Prices. The word echoed in my mind like a death knell. I had been sold once before by a man who should have protected me. Was I to be sold again, this time to a stranger whose motives I could not begin to fathom? I spent the following days in a state of quiet terror. I went about my duties with mechanical precision, but my mind was elsewhere, turning over the implications of what Mrs. Brennan had told me. What could the Duke of Wentworth possibly want with me? I was not beautiful enough to be a mistress, not educated enough to be a companion, not skilled enough to be of any particular use to a man of his station. Unless he had seen something in me that I could not see in myself. Unless that moment in the drawing room had meant something to him, as it had meant something to me. Unless, against all reason and probability, the Duke of Wentworth had looked at a servant girl on her knees and seen not an object to be used, but a person to be known. It was a foolish hope. I knew that even as I allowed it to take root in my heart. Men like the Duke did not fall in love with women like me. They did not rescue them from servitude and elevate them to positions of dignity. Such things happened only in stories, in the novels I had read by candlelight in my mother's cottage, when the world still seemed full of possibility. But the hope remained, stubborn and persistent, a small flame that refused to be extinguished. The summons came on a Thursday afternoon. Mr. Grimsby called me to his study, a room I rarely entered and never without dread. He sat behind his desk like a king upon a throne, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes gleaming with a satisfaction that made my stomach turn. "Eleanor," he said, gesturing for me to stand before him, "I have news that concerns you." I waited, my hands clasped before me, my expression carefully neutral. "The Duke of Wentworth has expressed an interest in your contract," he continued. "He has made an offer to purchase your remaining term of service." My heart hammered in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "And what was his offer, sir?" Mr. Grimsby smiled, and it was the smile of a man who knows he holds all the cards. £50,000. The number hung in the air between us, impossible and absurd. £50,000. A fortune beyond imagining. More money than my father could have gambled away in 10 lifetimes. More money than most people would see in their entire existence. For a servant girl worth £50. "Of course," Mr. Grimsby continued, leaning back in his chair, "I have not yet accepted. A man must consider his options after all. The Duke is not the only one who has expressed interest in your services." I understood his meaning perfectly. He was going to auction me to the highest bidder, like livestock at a market fair. The thought should have filled me with despair, but instead I felt something unexpected kindling in my chest. Anger. Pure, white-hot anger at the injustice of a world that allowed men to buy and sell women as if they were property. But I swallowed my anger, as I had learned to do. I lowered my eyes, as I had been taught, and I waited. Mr. Grimsby studied me for a long moment, then waved his hand in dismissal. "You may go. I will inform you when a decision has been made." I left his study with my composure intact, but the moment I reached the privacy of my small room in the servants' quarters, I sank onto my narrow bed and allowed myself to tremble. £50,000. The Duke of Wentworth had offered £50,000 for my contract, and I had no way of knowing whether his intentions were honorable or something far darker. The days that followed were an agony of uncertainty. I went about my work as always, scrubbing and polishing and serving, but my mind was consumed with questions I could not answer. What did the Duke want with me? Why had he offered such an astronomical sum? And what would become of me if Mr. Grimsby accepted his offer? It was nearly a fortnight later when the answer came. I was in the garden, beating dust from the drawing-room carpets, when a carriage unlike any I had ever seen pulled up to the front of the house. It was black and sleek, drawn by 4 matched horses the color of midnight, and it bore upon its door the Wentworth crest in silver and blue. My hands stilled on the carpet beater as I watched a footman descend from the carriage and approach the front door. A moment later, Mr. Grimsby's butler appeared, his face a mask of obsequious delight, and ushered the footman inside. I returned to my work, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. Whatever was about to happen, I knew my life would never be the same. An hour passed. Then 2. I finished with the carpets and moved on to other tasks, all the while straining to hear any news from within the house. Finally, as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Mrs. Brennan found me in the kitchen. "Eleanor," she said, her voice breathless with excitement, "you are wanted in the drawing-room, at once." I wiped my hands on my apron and smoothed my hair as best I could. My dress was worn and faded, my shoes scuffed and practical, my appearance that of exactly what I was, a servant girl with nothing to recommend her but her own stubborn dignity. But I held my head high as I walked to the drawing-room, and I did not allow my hands to tremble when I opened the door. He was there. The Duke of Wentworth stood by the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the fading light. Mr. Grimsby sat in his usual chair, looking like a cat who had swallowed a particularly plump canary, and between them, on the table, lay a stack of papers and a small wooden box that I somehow knew contained more money than I could comprehend. "Ah, Eleanor," Mr. Grimsby said, rising from his chair with an unctuous smile. "Come in, come in. The Duke wishes to speak with you." I entered the room and stopped at a respectful distance, my eyes downcast as propriety demanded. But I could feel the Duke's gaze upon me, steady and intense, and it took all my self-control not to look up and meet it. "Leave us." The Duke's voice was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable weight of command. Mr. Grimsby's smile faltered. "Your Grace, surely it would be more appropriate if I remained. The girl is still technically in my employ, and—" "Leave us," the Duke repeated, and this time there was steel beneath the velvet of his tone. "I wish to speak with Miss Ashford alone." Mr. Grimsby opened his mouth to protest, then thought better of it. He bowed stiffly and retreated from the room, closing the door behind him with more force than was strictly necessary. And then we were alone. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I kept my eyes on the floor, my hands clasped before me, my breath shallow in my chest. The silence stretched between us like a living thing, heavy with unspoken words and unexplored possibilities. "Look at me." His voice was gentler now, stripped of the authority he had wielded with Mr. Grimsby. It was almost a request rather than a command. Almost. I raised my eyes and met his gaze. He had moved closer while I was not watching, and now stood only a few feet away. This close, I could see details I had missed before. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight furrow between his brows, the way his hands, so elegant and aristocratic, were clenched at his sides as if he were restraining himself from reaching out. "Miss Ashford," he said, and my name in his voice was like music, like poetry, like something precious and rare. "I must apologize for the unconventional nature of this meeting. I have not conducted myself as a gentleman ought. I did not know how to respond to that, so I remained silent, waiting." He turned away and walked to the window, his back to me, his shoulders taut with tension. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion I had not expected to hear. "I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Since that morning in this very room, when I found you on your knees, scrubbing floors that should never have known your touch." He paused, and I saw his hands clench tighter. "I made inquiries. I learned of your situation, the contract, the circumstances of your acquisition." He spoke the last word as if it tasted of poison. £50, he continued, turning to face me once more. "Your own father sold you for £50, and this man, this Grimsby, has kept you in bondage for 3 years, treating you as less than human." I lifted my chin, a spark of defiance kindling within me. "I have survived, Your Grace. That is more than many in my position can say." Something flickered in his gray eyes. Admiration, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "You have done more than survive," he said quietly. "You have maintained your dignity in circumstances that would have broken lesser souls. That is what I saw in you that morning. That is what I have not been able to forget." He moved toward me slowly, as if approaching a wild creature he did not wish to frighten. When he stood before me, close enough that I could smell the sandalwood of his cologne and see the rapid pulse beating in his throat, he spoke again. "I have purchased your contract from Mr. Grimsby, £50,000. He smiled, and it transformed his face from cold marble to something warm and achingly human. A rather excessive sum, I am told, but I would have paid twice that, 10 times that, whatever it took to free you from this place." I stared at him, my mind struggling to comprehend what he was saying. You bought my freedom?" "No." He shook his head, his expression intent. "I have not bought your freedom, Miss Ashford. Your freedom was never mine to purchase. It belongs to you, as it always has." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. With great ceremony, he extended it toward me. "This is your contract. Signed over to you by Mr. Grimsby, paid in full by myself." He pressed the paper into my trembling hands. "You are free. You may go wherever you wish, do whatever you wish. You owe me nothing." I looked down at the document in my hands, the words blurring through the tears I could not stop from falling. I was free. After 3 years of servitude, after the betrayal of my own father, after believing I would never again know what it meant to belong to myself, I was free. But even as joy flooded through me, confusion followed close behind. I looked up at the Duke, searching his face for answers. "I do not understand," I whispered. "Why would you do this? Why would you spend a fortune to free a woman you do not even know?" He was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I looked into your eyes that morning, and I saw something I recognized. Loneliness, pride. A soul that refuses to be diminished, no matter what the world does to it." He reached out slowly and took my hand in his. Because for the first time in my life, I wanted to know someone. Not as a duke knows a subject or a master knows a servant, but as one human being knows another. His hand was warm around mine, gentle but strong, and I felt something shift in my chest, something that had been frozen for so long it had forgotten how to thaw. "I have not bought you, Miss Ashford," he continued, his thumb tracing slow circles on my palm. "I have not saved you. You have saved yourself, every day, for 3 years. All I have done is remove an obstacle from your path." "And what do you want in return?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Men do not give £50,000 for nothing, Your Grace. What is it you expect from me?" He met my gaze, and I saw in his eyes a vulnerability I would never have expected from a man of his power and position. "Nothing," he said. "I expect nothing. But if you would permit me—" He paused, and I saw a faint flush creep across his aristocratic cheekbones. "If you would permit me, I would like the privilege of knowing you, of calling upon you, of discovering who Eleanor Ashford truly is, beyond the servant girl who scrubbed floors and the daughter who was sold for £50. He lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to my knuckles, so light it was barely a whisper of warmth. "I paid £50,000 for your contract," he murmured against my skin. "But I would pay 50,000 more, and 50,000 beyond that, simply for the privilege of holding your hand." In that moment, standing in the drawing room of a man who had treated me as less than human, with my freedom clasped in one hand and my future uncertain before me, I made a choice. I chose to trust, not blindly, not foolishly, but with the cautious hope of a woman who has learned that not all hands that reach for her wish to cause harm. "I do not know you, Your Grace," I said softly, "and you do not know me. We are strangers, separated by wealth and station and 1,000 other barriers that society has erected between us." "I know," he replied. "I am asking for nothing more than the chance to change that. One conversation at a time, one day at a time." I looked into his gray eyes, searching for deception, for hidden motives, for any sign that this was too good to be true. But all I saw was sincerity and hope and a loneliness that mirrored my own. "Very well," I said. "You may call upon me, Your Grace, but I make no promises beyond that." His smile was like sunrise breaking over a winter landscape, transforming everything it touched. "That is all I ask." The weeks that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. The Duke arranged for me to stay at a respectable boarding house in the city, paying for my accommodations without condition or expectation. He sent me new clothes, new shoes, new everything, all of it fine, but not ostentatious, chosen with a care that spoke of someone who had paid attention to my preferences without my ever having voiced them. And he called upon me. Every day without fail, he appeared at the boarding house in his fine carriage, and we would walk together through the parks and gardens of the city. He asked me questions about my life, my thoughts, my dreams, and he listened to my answers with an intensity that made me feel, for the first time in years, that my words mattered. I learned about him too. I learned that beneath the cold exterior he presented to the world, Edward Blackwood was a man of deep feeling and fierce loyalty. I learned that his parents had died when he was young, leaving him to be raised by tutors and servants who cared more for his title than his well-being. I learned that he had built walls around his heart not because he did not feel, but because he felt too much, and the world had taught him that such feeling was weakness. I learned that he was kind, in the quiet ways that truly mattered. He remembered the names of every servant in his household. He funded schools for poor children and hospitals for those who could not afford care. He had never married because he could not stomach the idea of a union based on politics and property rather than genuine affection. I learned, in short, that he was a good man. And that knowledge terrified me more than anything else, because I was falling in love with him. It happened slowly, then all at once. It happened in the way he laughed at my observations, rare and genuine and utterly unguarded. It happened in the way he defended my honor when a society matron made a snide comment about my origins. It happened in the way he looked at me, as if I were the most precious thing in his world, as if my existence was a gift he had not expected and did not know how to deserve. But even as my heart opened to him, my mind counseled caution. I was still the daughter of a gambler who had sold me for £50. I had no family, no fortune, no social standing. The gap between us was a chasm that all the love in the world could not bridge, or so I thought. It was 3 months after my liberation when the Duke invited me to his estate for the first time. Wentworth Manor, he called it, and the name alone conjured images of grandeur and history that made my humble origins feel even more pronounced. I almost refused. I almost told him that it was too much, too fast, that I was not ready to enter his world in such a definitive way. But something in his eyes when he extended the invitation, a hope tinged with vulnerability, made it impossible to say no. The journey to Wentworth Manor took half a day by carriage. I spent the hours watching the countryside pass by my window, marveling at how my life had transformed in such a short time. 3 months ago, I had been a servant scrubbing floors. Now I was traveling in a duke's carriage to visit his ancestral home. The manor itself was everything I had imagined, and more. It rose from the landscape like a dream made solid, all honey-colored stone and elegant windows and gardens that seemed to stretch on forever. As the carriage approached, I saw servants lined up at the entrance, their faces curious but not unkind, their postures respectful without being obsequious. The Duke himself helped me descend from the carriage, his hand warm and steady around mine. "Welcome to Wentworth Manor, Miss Ashford," he said, and there was a note of anxiety in his voice that I had never heard before. "I hope it meets with your approval." I looked at the magnificent house, at the manicured grounds, at the staff awaiting us with patient dignity. Then I looked at the man beside me, the man who had spent a fortune to free a servant girl and asked for nothing in return but the chance to know her. "It is beautiful," I said, "but it is not the house I came to see." His smile was reward enough for any journey. The days at Wentworth Manor passed like pages in a book I never wanted to end. The Duke, Edward, showed me every corner of his estate with a pride that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with history. He told me stories of his ancestors, of the dukes and duchesses who had walked these halls before him, of the traditions and responsibilities that came with his title. But more than that, he showed me himself. He took me to his private library, where he confessed that he spent hours reading poetry and philosophy when society believed him to be attending to matters of business. He showed me the music room, where he played the piano with a skill that surprised me, his long fingers coaxing melodies from the keys that spoke of emotions he could not put into words. He walked with me through the gardens at sunset, pointing out flowers that his mother had planted, hedgerows that his father had designed, pathways that generations of Blackwoods had worn smooth with their passage. And in the quiet moments between explorations, we talked. About everything and nothing. About my mother and his parents, both lost too soon. About our fears and our hopes and our dreams for a future we were only beginning to imagine. About the strange and wonderful path that had brought us together, a duke and a servant girl, two souls who should never have met, but somehow had found each other nonetheless. On my final evening at Wentworth Manor, Edward led me to a part of the garden I had not yet seen. It was a small enclosed space, surrounded by high hedges and lit by lanterns that cast a warm glow over beds of roses in every color imaginable. "This was my mother's garden," he said, his voice soft with memory. "She planted it the year I was born. She used to bring me here when I was a boy, and we would sit among the flowers, and she would tell me stories." He turned to face me, and in the lantern light, his gray eyes shone with an emotion that stole my breath. "I have not brought anyone here since she died," he continued. "I could not bear to share this place with someone who would not understand what it means to me." I reached out and took his hand, lacing my fingers through his. "Edward," I whispered. "Eleanor." My name on his lips was a prayer, a promise, a plea. I know that we have not known each other long. I know that society would call this madness, a duke courting a woman of no family or fortune. But I find that I do not care what society thinks. I care only what you think. He brought my hand to his heart, pressing my palm flat against his chest so that I could feel the rapid beating beneath. "I love you," he said, the words simple and devastating and utterly true. "I loved you from the moment I saw you in that drawing room, with your worn dress and your calloused hands and your eyes that held more dignity than 100 aristocratic ladies combined. I loved you when I learned how you had been betrayed by your own father, and I loved you more when I saw how you had refused to let that betrayal break you. I love you now, standing in my mother's garden, and I will love you tomorrow and the day after and every day until I draw my last breath." Tears were streaming down my face, but I made no move to wipe them away. These were not tears of sorrow or despair. These were tears of joy, of wonder, of a heart so full it could not contain its own happiness. "I love you too," I whispered. "I have tried not to. I have told myself 100 reasons why I should not, why it is impossible, why a woman like me could never deserve a man like you. But my heart will not listen to reason. It knows only that when I am with you, I am home. For the first time in my life, I am home." Edward smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "Then marry me," he said. "Be my duchess. Share my life, my home, my heart. Let me spend the rest of my days proving to you that you are worthy of every happiness this world can offer." I should have hesitated. I should have asked for time to think, to consider, to weigh the implications of such a monumental decision. But I had spent too much of my life hesitating, waiting, enduring. For once, I wanted to leap. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I will marry you." He swept me into his arms, and when his lips met mine, it was as if all the loneliness and sorrow of my past years fell away like autumn leaves in a winter wind. I was no longer the daughter who had been sold. I was no longer the servant who had scrubbed floors. I was Eleanor Ashford, beloved of the Duke of Wentworth, and I was finally, gloriously free. Our engagement was the scandal of the season. I had expected as much, of course. A duke marrying a former servant girl was not something that happened in polite society, and those who considered themselves the guardians of social order were quick to voice their disapproval. There were whispers at every gathering, pointed looks across every ballroom, snubs and slights too numerous to count. But I found that I did not care. Perhaps it was because I had endured so much worse than the displeasure of society matrons. Perhaps it was because I had learned, in my years of servitude, that the opinions of others held only as much power as I chose to give them. Perhaps it was simply because I had Edward beside me, his hand in mine, his love a shield against every barb and slight. Whatever the reason, I faced the ton with my head held high and my dignity intact. Edward, for his part, was magnificent. He attended every ball, every dinner, every social event with me on his arm, daring anyone to question his choice. When an elderly countess made a remark about the inappropriateness of our match, he informed her, in tones of icy courtesy, that he found the company of his future duchess to be infinitely more appropriate than that of small-minded gossips. When a group of young lords attempted to make sport of my origins, he challenged the ringleader to a duel and only relented when the man offered a public apology. "You did not need to do that," I told him afterward when we were alone in his carriage. "I can fight my own battles." "I know you can," he replied, taking my hand and pressing a kiss to my palm. "But you should not have to, not anymore. You have spent your whole life fighting alone. Let me stand beside you now." And so, I did. I let him stand beside me, and I stood beside him, and together we faced a world that did not understand us and did not approve of us, but could not break us. The wedding took place in the chapel at Wentworth Manor, on a day in late spring when the gardens were bursting with color and the air was sweet with the scent of roses. It was not the grand society affair that tradition demanded of a ducal wedding. It was something smaller, more intimate, attended only by those who truly wished us well. Mrs. Brennan came, tears streaming down her kind face as she watched me walk down the aisle. Thomas the footman was there too, standing awkwardly in his best coat, his eyes bright with happiness for the girl who had once been his fellow prisoner. Even Mr. Grimsby had been invited, though he had declined with a terse note citing prior engagements. I suspected the true reason was that he could not bear to watch the servant girl he had treated so poorly become a duchess. The thought brought me no small satisfaction. I wore a gown of ivory silk, simple but elegant, chosen not for its cost, but for its beauty. My hair was dressed with flowers from the garden, the same roses that Edward's mother had planted so many years ago. And as I walked toward the man who waited for me at the altar, I felt my mother's presence beside me, as real as if she had never left. The ceremony was brief but beautiful. We spoke our vows before God and those who loved us, and when Edward slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt the last remnants of my old life fall away. I was no longer Eleanor Ashford, the girl who had been sold. I was Eleanor Blackwood, Duchess of Wentworth, and I was happy. For the first time in my memory, I was truly, deeply, completely happy. The years that followed were the happiest of my life. I will not pretend that every day was perfect. There were challenges, of course, as there are in any marriage. There were disagreements and misunderstandings and moments of frustration. There were times when the weight of my new responsibilities felt overwhelming, when the expectations of society seemed impossible to meet, when I doubted whether I truly belonged in this world of wealth and privilege. But through it all, Edward was my anchor. He believed in me when I could not believe in myself. He encouraged me when I faltered, celebrated me when I succeeded, held me when I wept. He loved me not in spite of my humble origins, but because of them, because they had shaped me into the woman he had fallen in love with. And I loved him. Oh, how I loved him. I loved his kindness and his strength, his intelligence and his humor, his passion for justice, and his tenderness toward those weaker than himself. I loved the way he looked at me across a crowded ballroom, as if I were the only person in the world. I loved the way he held my hand as we walked through the gardens, his fingers laced through mine as naturally as breathing. I loved the way he whispered my name in the darkness, as if it were a sacred thing. Together, we built a life. We transformed Wentworth Manor from a lonely monument to the past into a warm and welcoming home. We hosted gatherings that brought together people from all walks of life, not just the aristocracy, but artists and scholars and merchants and anyone else who had something interesting to contribute. We used Edward's wealth and influence to fund causes we believed in: schools for the poor, hospitals for the sick, shelters for women who had nowhere else to turn. We changed things in our small way. We showed the world that love did not have to follow the rules society had set for it, that a duke could marry a servant girl and be happy, that dignity and worth were not determined by birth or fortune, but by the content of one's character. And every day, every single day, I thanked God for the strange twist of fate that had brought Edward to that drawing room on an autumn morning, when a servant girl was on her knees scrubbing floors that should never have known her touch. It was 15 years after our wedding when I received word that my father had died. He had spent his final years in a poorhouse, having gambled away what little remained of his ill-gotten gains. The man who had sold his daughter for £50 had ended his life with nothing to his name but regrets and a tattered reputation. I expected to feel something when I heard the news. Anger, perhaps, or satisfaction that justice had been served, or even grief for the father he might have been had circumstances been different. But all I felt was a vast, quiet emptiness. Edward found me in the garden, sitting among his mother's roses with the letter crumpled in my lap. He did not speak as he sat beside me. He simply took my hand and held it, offering his presence as comfort. "I do not know how to feel," I confessed after a long silence. "He was a terrible father. He sold me like cattle, took everything I had, destroyed any chance I might have had at a normal life. I should hate him. I should be glad he is gone. But he was still my father." I looked down at the letter, at the words that informed me of his passing in such cold, clinical terms. He was the first man who ever held me, the first man who ever spoke my name. And no matter what he did afterward, there was a time when I was a little girl, and he was my whole world. Edward was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You have a generous heart, Eleanor. Too generous, perhaps, for a man who did not deserve it." I turned to face him, my eyes bright with unshed tears. What should I do? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think," he said at last, "that you should mourn what might have been. Not the man he was, but the father he could have been. And then I think you should let him go." And so I did. I mourned not the gambler who had sold me, but the father I had wished for in my childhood dreams. I mourned the relationship we might have had, the love we might have shared, the family we might have been. And then, when the mourning was done, I let him go. It was the most freeing thing I had ever done. The years continued to pass, as years do, and I continued to be amazed by the fullness of my life. I had expected happiness, but I had not expected this overwhelming, abundant joy that seemed to grow rather than diminish with time. Edward and I grew old together, and I watched the lines deepen on his beloved face with gratitude rather than sorrow. Each wrinkle was a testament to a year we had shared, a memory we had made, a moment of laughter or tenderness or passion that had left its mark upon us. The world around us changed, as worlds do, but the love between us remained constant. We adapted to new customs and new technologies, welcomed new friends and mourned old ones, navigated the shifting currents of society with grace and good humor. Through it all, we held fast to each other. I am an old woman now, as I write these words. My hair has gone silver, my hands are marked with age, and the face that looks back at me from the mirror bears little resemblance to the young servant girl who once scrubbed floors in Mr. Grimsby's house. But my heart is unchanged. I still love Edward with the same fierce, tender passion I discovered in his mother's garden all those years ago. I still marvel at the providence that brought us together, the strange alchemy of chance and choice that transformed a moment of humiliation into a lifetime of happiness. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the evening, when the fire burns low and the house settles into peaceful silence, Edward takes my weathered hand in his and presses a kiss to my knuckles. And he says, with the same wonder he showed on that first day, I would pay £50,000 just to hold your hand. And I believe him. After all these years, after all we have been through, I still believe him. Because that is the miracle of true love. It does not diminish with time or familiarity. It does not grow stale or ordinary. It deepens, like a river carving its course through stone, until it becomes so much a part of you that you cannot remember who you were before it existed. I was sold for £50 by a father who saw no value in me beyond the coins I could fetch. I was bought for $50,000 by a man who wanted nothing more than to set me free. And in that exchange, in that extraordinary act of grace and generosity, I discovered something I had never known before. I discovered my own worth. Not the worth the world assigns, measured in pounds and pence and social standing, but the worth that exists within each of us, waiting to be recognized. The worth of a soul that refuses to be broken. The worth of a heart that continues to hope. The worth of a spirit that rises again and again, no matter how many times it is pushed down. My father sold me for £50 on a Tuesday morning, as casually as one might sell a horse that had outlived its usefulness. But in the end, it was not the selling that defined me. It was the rising. And as I look back on my life now, from the vantage point of many decades, I can say with certainty that I would not change a single moment of my story. Not the poverty, not the betrayal, not the years of servitude. Because all of it, every painful, difficult, heartbreaking moment of it, led me to that drawing room on an autumn morning. Led me to him. Led me home. I am Eleanor Blackwood, Duchess of Wentworth. I was sold for £50 and valued at $50,000. But the true measure of my worth cannot be calculated in currency. It is measured in love. And by that measure, I am the richest woman in the world. When I think of happiness, I do not think of ballrooms glittering with candlelight or gardens bursting with summer blooms, though I have known both in abundance. I think instead of small moments, quiet moments, the kind that slip past unnoticed unless you are paying very close attention. I think of Edward reading to me by firelight, his voice low and warm, as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I think of walking through the village with him, watching how he greets every person we meet by name, how he remembers their troubles and their triumphs, how he treats the lowest tenant with the same respect he shows the highest lord. I think of the morning he found me crying in the garden, overwhelmed by the magnitude of my new responsibilities as Duchess, and how he sat beside me in the grass without regard for his fine clothes and held me until the tears subsided. I think of the night I found him weeping in his study, mourning a friend lost to fever, and how he let me comfort him without shame or embarrassment, trusting me with his vulnerability as he trusted me with everything else. These are the moments that matter. These are the treasures no thief can steal and no misfortune can diminish. In the early years of our marriage, I struggled with what to do with myself. I had been a servant for so long that idleness felt foreign and uncomfortable. I needed purpose, needed to feel that my existence contributed something of value to the world. Edward, understanding this as he understood everything about me, encouraged me to pursue whatever called to my heart. At first, I hesitated. What could a former servant girl offer to the world of wealth and privilege she had married into? But then I remembered the other servants I had known. Mrs. Brennan, with her kind eyes and gentle hands. Thomas, with his awkward courtesy and hidden tenderness. All the nameless, faceless workers who kept the great houses running, whose labor was essential and whose humanity was invisible. I decided to make them visible. I began simply by improving conditions for the servants at Wentworth Manor. I ensured they had comfortable quarters, fair wages, reasonable hours, and time for rest and recreation. I learned their names, their stories, their hopes and fears. I treated them as people rather than furniture, and slowly they began to trust me. Then I expanded my efforts. I used Edward's resources to establish a charity for servants who had been dismissed without reference, those unfortunate souls who found themselves cast out into the world with no means of support. I created training programs for young people who wished to enter domestic service, ensuring they would have the skills to secure good positions. I lobbied, quietly but persistently, for legal protections that would prevent the worst abuses of the contract labor system that had once held me captive. It was not glamorous work. It did not earn me admiration in the salons of society, but it mattered. It made a difference in the lives of people who had no one else to advocate for them. And perhaps, most importantly, it gave meaning to my suffering. All those years of scrubbing floors and enduring cruelty had not been wasted. They had given me understanding, empathy, and the determination to ensure that others would not have to endure what I had endured. Edward supported me in all of it. He opened his purse without question, used his influence to advance my causes, and took genuine pride in the work I was doing. When society whispered that the Duchess of Wentworth was spending too much time with servants, he silenced them with a single raised eyebrow and a quiet reminder that his wife's character was not open for discussion. We made quite a pair, the two of us. The cold duke who turned out to have a warm heart, the servant girl who became a champion of the powerless. Together, we defied expectations at every turn. I remember one evening, perhaps 10 years into our marriage, when we attended a ball hosted by the Earl of something or other. I cannot recall his name now. What I remember is standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching the swirl of silk and jewels and feeling Edward's hand settle at the small of my back. "What are you thinking?" he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. I turned to face him, and I knew that my expression must have been full of wonder. "I was thinking," I said, "about how strange life is. 10 years ago I was scrubbing the floor of a drawing room much like this one. And now I stand here, wearing silk and diamonds, with the man I love by my side. Does it trouble you? The strangeness of it?" I considered the question. "No," I said at last. "It does not trouble me. It amazes me. Every day I wake up amazed that this is my life." He smiled, that rare and beautiful smile that he reserved only for me. "I feel the same way. Every day I wake up amazed that you chose me." I laughed, because it seemed absurd. "You are a duke. You could have had any woman in England." "Perhaps," he agreed. "But I did not want any woman in England. I wanted you, only you, from the first moment I saw you." I rose on my toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek, scandalizing the nearby matrons, but not caring in the slightest. "And you have me," I whispered. "For always." He took my hand and led me onto the dance floor, and we waltzed through the glittering crowd as if we were the only two people in the world. Because in that moment, we were. The years continued to unspool like ribbon from a spool, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. We weathered storms together, both literal and figurative. We celebrated triumphs and mourned losses. We grew older, slower, softer around the edges, but we never grew apart. If anything, time only deepened our connection. The passion of youth mellowed into something richer and more sustaining, a love that was as comfortable as a favorite chair and as essential as air. We finished each other's sentences, knew each other's moods before a word was spoken, and could communicate entire conversations with a single glance. It was not perfect. No love is. We had our disagreements, our frustrations, our moments of misunderstanding, but we had also learned the art of forgiveness, the grace of apology, the wisdom of letting go. We chose each other over and over again in ways both large and small. That is what marriage is, I have come to understand. Not the grand gesture of the wedding day, but the countless small choices that follow. The choice to be kind when you are tired. The choice to listen when you would rather speak. The choice to stay when it would be easier to leave. Edward and I made those choices every day, and every day our love grew stronger for the making. I am nearing the end of my story now, though I am not yet at the end of my life. God willing, I have many years left to spend in the company of the man I love, in the home we have built together, surrounded by the legacy we have created. But I wanted to set down these memories while they are still fresh, still vivid, still capable of bringing tears to my eyes and warmth to my heart. I wanted to bear witness to the extraordinary journey that brought me from that cottage in the country, to the drawing room of Mr. Grimsby's house, to the arms of the Duke of Wentworth. I wanted to tell you, whoever you are, wherever you are reading this, that hope is never foolish, that dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered, that the worth of a soul cannot be measured in pounds and pence, and that love, true love, can find you in the most unexpected places. My father sold me for £50. the Duke paid 50,000 to set me free. But the true currency of my life has been something far more valuable than money. It has been courage. The courage to survive, to endure, to rise. It has been faith. The faith to believe that better things were possible, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. And it has been love. The love of a mother who taught me my worth. The love of friends who stood by me in darkness. The love of a husband who saw me, truly saw me, and thought me worthy of everything he had to give. I am Eleanor Blackwood, and this has been my story. It is a story of loss and redemption, of sorrow and joy, of darkness and light. But above all, it is a story of love. And love, I have learned, is the only story worth telling. Tonight, as I write these final words, Edward sits across from me in his favorite chair. The fire crackles in the hearth. Rain patters against the windows. And every now and then, he looks up from his book and catches my eye, and we share a smile that needs no words. We are old now, he and I. Our bodies are failing in the way that bodies do. Our time on this earth grows shorter with each passing day. But I am not afraid. I am not afraid because I have lived a life worth living. I have loved and been loved in return. I have made a difference, however small, in the lives of those around me. I have found meaning and purpose and joy. And when my time comes to leave this world, I will go knowing that I was valued, that I was cherished, that I mattered. My father sold me for 50 pounds, but my husband, my Edward, showed me that I was worth infinitely more. And that, in the end, is all any of us really need. To be seen, to be valued, to be loved. I have been all three, and I am grateful, so grateful, forever and always.